Thank you.
Okay, so yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. So I've been leading the hearing aids for music projects, so I'll just talk about a little bit about project aims, about the research studies that we carried out, and then today I'm going to focus on some findings from the large-scale survey that we did. I'm going to look at just sort of some elements of listening behaviour and experiences, and then I'm going to compare those by hearing loss level, and then draw out some of the implications of those findings. So just to start off, the Hearing Aids for Music project had several aims: to understand how different levels of hearing impairment and the use of hearing aid technology affect music listening behaviour, to understand the benefits and the challenges of listening to music through hearing aids, to understand more about what practitioners do to address musical needs in clinic, and then to develop guidance where possible tailored to level of hearing impairment to help improve access to music for people with all levels of deafness. And it's that element that I'm going to focus on today, trying to sort of understand different levels of hearing impairment, what that might mean for advice for practitioners. So we carried out a number of research studies, a clinical survey where we were asking about problems that hearing aid users were experiencing with music, whether this affected their quality of life, and whether they'd had discussions with audiologists. We then conducted a survey with audiologists to ask about their experiences, if they'd had any training about music, what sorts of advice they provided, and whether they had any experience of fitting hearing aids for music. The third study was an interview study, so that was a more in-depth study with 22 participants talking about their hearing loss history, their musical engagement, and how their hearing loss has impacted their musical engagement over time. We then did an online national survey with 1,500 hearing aid users, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. You can find out a sort of overview of some of the first studies in the project in some of my published work to date. So today I'm going to focus on the national online survey. We did actually translate the survey into British Sign Language so that people with profound loss could also participate, and around 7% used the videos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk through the sections of the survey, what we explored, and then pull out some findings according to hearing loss level. So we asked, first of all, sort of typical demographics: age, gender, level of education, and overall with the 1,500 hearing aid users, we had a mean age of 60 and the age range was 18 to 95, a very equal gender split, and actually quite a highly trained population, so highly educated, population. So as you can see here, we'd got sort of, around 60% having a degree, whereas the national average is around 23%. So I think this probably was as a result of the channels of recruitment through higher education institutions. They were mostly from the UK, around 90 from the UK, and about 10% from international. So we asked demographics. We also asked about musical engagement. So we used 6 items that were from some of my previous work, which were indicators of a high level of engagement in music listening, such as the importance of music to them, how often they listen, whether they're wanting to listen to self-chosen music, and so on. So there were these 6 factors that had been used in previous research, and we can see from the graph at the bottom there that most people were agreeing with these statements about engagement. So we had a mostly highly engaged sample. We also asked a question about avoiding listening, and we did find that those with more severe losses were more likely to report avoiding listening in certain situations. But overall, highly engaged in listening sample. We also asked about musical training. You can see here that there's three items that we asked about, which resulted in a musical training score. And contrary to the engagement in listening, actually the musical training was shifted towards having very little training. As you can see, nearly a fifth of the participants here reported that they'd not studied any music at school, and they'd not actually engaged in any musical activities like singing in a choir or playing in a group. So it varied, but you can actually see at the other end some higher scores, and we obviously did have some very trained participants within the sample overall as well. So we asked them about the styles of music that they liked listening to. We asked them about the importance of various different features for their enjoyment of music. And then we asked them about uses of music. We didn't know how people with hearing loss were using music, whether that was in any different way to how people without hearing loss would use music. It's just data that we're collecting because there wasn't really anything on this beforehand. So asking about uses of music and preferences. We then asked about hearing loss. We decided to measure hearing loss in this self-report study in several ways. So we used a hearing loss descriptor. We asked them to indicate their memory of what their audiologist said was their hearing loss level. And then for a subset, we were able to get pure tone audiometry for 113. And then we looked to see where the best agreement was. So this is the hearing loss descriptor. This was taken, this is about their experience without their hearing aids in speech perception without hearing aids. And this was taken from descriptors, derived from scriptors from the RNID, so the Royal National Institute of the Deaf, and also BATOD, which is the British Association of Teachers of the Deaf. So we wanted some sort of experience descriptor. So we used those along with, as I said, what they remembered the audiologist saying and the PTA. This graph shows that when we compared across the three types of hearing loss, there was less than half agreement in both cases. So in both the case of the PTA and the speech descriptor and the PTA and what they remember their audiologist saying their hearing loss was, there was less than 50% agreement, but there was more agreement with the experience. So rooted in what is their experience without the hearing aids. So we went ahead and used that as the variable through which to kind of divide the data up by hearing loss. And this is the result. So these were the relative percentage in the different categories that we had. We asked various questions about hearing aid technology, as you can see there. We added diagrams in to actually help them to identify what they were wearing, because particularly older people don't always know exactly what fitting they have or what sort of dome. So we asked those questions. We had around 83% of the sample wearing 2 hearing aids, and around sort of 80% who've been wearing them for 3 or more years. So we've got a sample here who have been wearing their hearing aids, predominantly 2, for quite some time. We also asked about music program use. In terms of kind of the sort of listening experiences, we split this into reproduced and also live music context. And you can see here the variety of things that we asked about: engagement, how long have you been spending listening, in what mode. We asked about the helpfulness of hearing aids for hearing out particular musical features. And then we asked also about the difficulties that were experienced. And these were based in the prior work, in the interview work. We also asked about the strategies that they use, such as adjusting the program or adjusting the volume, and their ease of listening to different genres in that particular setting, and roughly the same questions for the live music contexts. And then finally, we asked about their last visit to their audiologists and discussions. Now, I'm not going to be able to go through all of these different areas, but I'll just pick out a few of the key findings from the survey. So first of all, just to note that there was a high level of musical engagement across the sample. So 87 agreed that music was important, 77 saying that they preferred to be listening to self-chosen music, which we've seen in other research as an indication of high engagement. 67% report listening as often as they can. We did find a statistical difference between the hearing loss levels using that speech descriptor, so the one that had the highest level of agreement with the PTA data. And we did find that those with the severe and a profound loss are slightly less likely to be engaging with music. And also we found that those with more severe loss were more likely to report avoiding listening to music as well. But overall, you can see here that there was a very high engagement across the group. So lots of time spending listening to recorded music, and also lots of time going to gigs as well. So we asked, how many live music events have you attended, and what types do you attend? And you can see that 2/3 going to a gig at least every couple of months. So they're engaged with listening, and therefore and also live music events as well. We asked about how they're using music. We found overall that the uses of music were in line with the general literature on everyday listening. So the main reasons being listening to music for pleasure, for relaxation, for reminiscence, and for regulating mood in some way. There were low ratings overall for did you listen to music in your work, and then also did you use it to help with tinnitus. It's got low ratings overall as well. There were differences by hearing loss level. So this is all of the uses that you can see up here, but I'll just pull up those where there were statistically significant differences. Overall, we can see that those with more severe hearing loss are less likely to use music for pleasure, less likely to use it for other people's pleasure. So that taps into sharing music with others and encouraging them to listen. Less likely to use it to create the right atmosphere, for example. So you can see the significant differences there in the uses of music. We looked at musical preferences as well. So we asked them to indicate their preferences from a predetermined list. What we found overall was that the highest or most preferred styles were classical styles, classical chamber and classical orchestral, followed by blues, musical theatre, rock and choral music. So they were the sort of core preferences as a whole in the group. If we then look at differences by hearing loss level, you can see in the table on the left-hand side that there were significant differences in the appreciation specifically of classical music and choral and opera music, with when people had more severe hearing, well, self-reported more severe hearing loss. And if we look in some of the open-ended responses, we can see the sort of comments that go along with that quantitative finding about having difficulties listening to classical music, particularly because of the complexity, because of following multiple lines and harmonies. So having some issues there. We actually found that that matched what the people with hearing loss were telling us about their preference for musical features as well. So you can see here that there are some differences in the extent to which musical features are important in their appreciation of music. So what we found was that the more severe the hearing loss, the less important they rated voice, instrumentation, and harmony, for example. And there was as you can see, with sort of rhythm and tempo, with more severe hearing loss, there was statistically a greater indication that those elements of music were important. And I've just picked out some qualitative quotes here about those with more severe losses having problems. That's not to say that it's just those with severe losses that were having problems, but just explaining the trend in the data there. So we then asked about the helpfulness of hearing aids and the difficulties experienced. So for the helpfulness of hearing aids, we said, when you're listening to recorded music, how helpful are your hearing aids for hearing out these different elements? And we can see here that very helpful is the dominant response here for across these different categories, which was really pleasing. If we look then across by hearing loss level, we can see again there's a difference. That there is a notable difference there with lyrics and instruments. So in recorded settings, the impact of hearing loss showing that lyrics and instruments are harder to hear out for those with more severe losses. We then asked about listening in live music context. Now here we can see that overall for the participant group as a whole, sort of very helpful is no longer the top response, particularly for lyrics and instruments. So this is telling a story which is congruent with other research about the real difficulties that people with hearing loss have in live music contexts, in particular, with hearing out particular musical elements. And then again, in a live context, you can see here with this patterning of results that almost across the board, with the exception of being able to hear out the baseline, that those with the more severe losses were experiencing more problems, so they were less able to hear out instruments, lyrics and melody. With difficulties experienced, I've just had a ping pong bat shown to me, so I'll probably have to skip through a few slides just to say that most of all, again, pleasingly, never was the response to am I experiencing these difficulties in recorded settings, with the exception of distortion. So at least 80% reporting that they're experiencing distortion. There were some differences in two categories, so that's distortion and too much bass for those with more severe hearing losses. And that pattern was shown in the live context as well, except we've got more distortion overall and more discomfort from loud sounds across the sample in the live context. And then again, this pattern of experiencing too much distortion and too much bass, in particular for those with more severe hearing losses. And then a graph that I like to show a lot, I've shown it in many presentations, was this overall rating scale of the helpfulness of hearing aids in both recorded and live context. So you can see here that the modal response is 8, so 8 out of 10 for their hearing aids, but the average in both of those settings is actually 6. Now, just because of time, I'm going to skip through a few slides here and just come straight to my sort of summary and implications here, just to sort of round off with some of the things that I think are important from the survey. Just to say that people are highly engaged with music, regular listening, attendance at concerts. So Gunther said this morning, we assume people with hearing loss are engaged with music, and this provides some good evidence of that. And I think it's important, therefore, that music is addressed in clinics, that audiologists bring up the issue of music with patients wherever possible. We do know that there are some differences with hearing loss level. So those with more severe losses are less likely to report pleasure from engaging with music. They're less likely to be able to hear out different elements of the music or report that their hearing aids are helpful for hearing out those elements, and are less able to appreciate complex styles. So I think, again, this is sort of important to manage expectations in clinic depending on level of hearing loss, and sort of encourage the use of technologies and specific strategies that people have reported are useful in those live contexts, like moving away from the sound source, adjusting volume, adjusting program, and also using a music program where possible. I just want to say, obviously, hearing aids are helpful. It's really easy to focus on the problems when there's problems with dynamics and sound quality and so on, but they are helpful, but they do need improving. The technology needs improving, and in particular, there are uncertainties, as we heard earlier, around music programs. So we would benefit from sort of encouraging music program use and tailoring and mapping the outcomes. I'm getting out, I need to wrap up now, look. So I just wanted to say we've used some of these findings to develop some guidance, both for patients and for practitioners, about what some of the research shows, and also what the hearing aid users have been telling us, and how that can be used to support counselling in clinic. It's just a starting point. It's a first version of the resources, and I've got a card for everybody here which points towards those resources, which I'll hand out afterwards. Okay, so I'm just going to thank my team because this was not a solo endeavour, and then we'll move on to any questions. Thank you.